I think I said before, Assembly Member, that if we look at the dollars in hand, the federal dollars, the bond money, and the cap and trade dollars, we estimate about a $20 billion allocation of those funds, and that does provide sufficient funding, and I think the LAO said that, if you make those other assumptions, to San Jose, and it's about $30 billion to LA. So it's simple math. We simply didn't have $30 billion, we had $20 billion, and we could get this up and running now. I wouldn't call it an admission, sir, as much as just a recognition of the math.
How do you intend to finance closing that gap? How do you get south and pay for it?
There are a number of different strategies. Let me just first say, when I first got to the High-Speed Rail Authority Board, in our first draft business plan 6 weeks after I got here, people had put in a whole bunch of different pots of money that could be there, and I didn't really find that credible. It was also my experience from 12 years on the BART board that these things are built in segments and dollars aren't always identifiable, in fact, rarely identifiable at the beginning. And so we took a very constrained view to just talking about things that had some certainty to them. On the Senate side, on Monday, they asked us to come back in the final business plan and lay out different sources of money that could fill that gap. But for these purposes, sir, let me just say that our estimate is that the fully built-out system will generate about $20 billion of private sector concession funds. Now, not all of that will be associated with the first leg, but there will be pieces of that with the second leg. Secondly, we haven't even, what you'll see in the final business plan, based on the request from the Senate side, is we will discuss a range of potential sources of money that we really haven't delved into too much. For example, in Japan, 32% of the revenues that the private sector operator gets come from real estate development around the stations. There's new legislation from this legislature. There are other potential legislative vehicles that would allow us to harvest some of what we anticipate will be enormous development around these stations. So that's one source of money. Asset monetization. We're building 520-mile linear system. We already hear from people who want to have us lease our right-of-way for fiber optics. Further federal money, I think, could be there. But are there gaps? There are. I would just point out that the Bond Act never contemplated that this whole thing would be opened up at once. What it said was you can build it in usable segments. You have to show you have the money for each segment, and that's what we're doing. So, Assembly Member, I'm not going to pretend that we sit here today and know exactly how all the rest of this is going to be funded. That is a standard that we can't meet today. I don't think any transit agency could meet. But we have our arms around pretty big chunks of it, and we are confident that about 2/3 of it right now is identified from current or sources that are reasonably potential, and we're looking at those other sources, and we'll lay that out in further detail in the final plan.
We've heard a lot about securitization. That's a code word for debt, for borrowing. How much do you propose to borrow? What would the terms of that borrowing look like? And what kind of a payback structure? How far out does debt instruments that you may be considering go?
Well, of course, a lot of those questions will be determined by the market conditions at the time. But in the draft business plan, and I think Ms. Peters alluded to this before, there would be about $5.3 billion, I think we said, of $5.2 billion that would be proceeds from financing, and that would be tied to the longevity of the cap and trade program as a financing mechanism. We don't have to borrow. We can go pay as you go. And I think we talk about that in the draft plan. That just means it takes longer. And again, I think the question of debt always is balanced against the question of benefit. So we would make that decision in concert with the legislature because, as was pointed out, well, we would probably need, the market would probably require some specific legislative authorization. And so this body would have the opportunity to reflect on that balance. Yeah. And it's like anything else. You get the thing built faster, you get the benefits faster, the employment, the tax revenues, and you're carrying some debt. And so we would need to look at that. But we said we think the sensible approach is to go pay as you go up to some part in the middle of next decade and then finance the rest. And we think that's the best balance. But you and your colleagues will have a chance to reflect on that before we go forward.
Again, what I hear is that there is an anticipation that the people of California and the legislature would have to, in some way, act as a banker here.
No, that a securitization, sir, means that what you're borrowing against is an anticipated revenue stream. So if that revenue stream were already created, then there's no further obligation. It's not a general obligation bond. It would be against those revenues. I'm somewhat familiar with securitizations. I've dealt with them in the past. And the bankers in those cases asked that the legislature make certain commitments that that revenue stream would be available, but not for a generalized impact on the public at large.
But again, the taxpayers would have to, through this legislature, would have to approve the debt and the stream of revenue. I mean, it's a debt instrument. It is a borrowing of a lot of money.
They would have already approved it, Assembly Member. What I'm saying is, if there's a stream of revenue that is in the cap and trade program, even if today, let's just talk about 2020, if what we wanted to do today was to say, well, we'd like to just get that lump of money right now, we would ask the legislature for authority, and actually you've already given it to us because in 862 it said we could finance off of the cap and trade revenues. We could go out to a private financing source or a public financing source and say, see this revenue stream? If you believe in this revenue stream, we'd like to borrow against it now. There'd be no impact on the public. It's already a revenue stream in existence.
I took the opportunity to look through the 38-page response by Barclays Bank to you. Mm-hmm. It raises all of the similar kinds of uncertainties and concern that the LAO raises, and essentially, if you read through it, it just says that there are so many contingencies, so many uncertainties. So I guess I'm just saying my level of confidence certainly is not at your level of confidence with respect. There's a suggestion, I think, in the plan that part of the second phase or the completion financing would come through profits in the first segment?
That's right.
You are suggesting that the route between San Jose and Shafter will produce
positive operating cash
profits.
Right. Profits is
as is normally and understandable in terms of profits after all expenses.
That is correct.
Okay. There is, we've tried to look, do you know of any high-speed rail operations in the world that make substantial profit?
Actually, all of them, virtually all of them, make an operating profit, which means that once the capital is expended, that they operate without any further subsidy and they throw off excess cash. A couple of them actually throw off enough excess cash to pay back some of their capital cost. We're not suggesting, although we kind of think we might get there, but we're not suggesting that's the case. Because of that fact, sir, that is why the authors of the Bond Act put in the requirement that there would be no operating subsidy, because they didn't think there needed to be, because they looked at the experience around the world. And I would also, finally, on this point, just observe, the closest thing we have to high-speed rail in the United States right now is the Acela service between Washington and Boston. That service, on its best day, maybe gets to 135 miles an hour. The track is terrible. They need to upgrade it. That service throws off excess cash that subsidizes other Amtrak operations. That's the closest thing we have today. It is not a true high-speed rail system. But around the world, once the capital is expended, these systems generate positive operating cash flows. And our business plan lays out the operating costs and the revenues and shows that there is positive net revenue, what you would call profit, even from this segment. That's why we're saying we can build it.
Yeah. The best I could find was Osaka and Tokyo, and they, I guess, break even through a little bit of what you define as profit. And I think the other one is the one from Paris to Lyon. But I do think it is a stretch to suggest that this segment's going to throw off profit. One final, I know that we're getting concerned about time. Your plan says that a round-trip ticket from Fresno to Silicon Valley is going to be about $126. It's $63 one way. The suggestion that we're going to load that train up with people who are going to go to Silicon Valley 5 days a week to work, my calculator said that's $32,760. I'm not convinced that's a. I mean, how deep are you going to have to subsidize a ticket to make it reasonably and affordable for people who are trying to buy an inexpensive home in the valley and get to a high-paying job in Northern California at $32,000 a year?
Well, there's 2 points on this. First of all, the ridership and revenue model is based on sort of average numbers. A private sector operator will come in and do the same thing that they do with airlines, which is they will bring their own revenue optimization to this, which means that some people will be able to get discounted tickets for advanced purchases, for block purchases, for things like that. And so the actual cost for people will depend on the conditions in the private sector operator trying to make a profit at that point. The other thing is, we were just down in Silicon Valley. They made it very clear to us that a number of those companies provide transit support today for their workers. This would, I think, be something that we would anticipate to see. It would not be a subsidy from us, but it's not to say that the private sector couldn't help subsidize, as they do today, some of their workers to make those economics work.
I appreciate the time. I remain unconvinced, but I appreciate your answer.
We have you in the potential supporter column, Assembly. Thank you, sir.
I appreciate your eternal optimism.
The only way
Mr.
to get something built, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be extremely brief, I promise. So the biggest concern that I've had with the shift in operating segment to to north instead of south is the concern that Mr. Patterson just expressed, that we didn't have a clear funding plan to complete phase one of the project. And if we don't complete phase one, that southern route, then that turns the project into a regional transit project instead of the statewide project that we promised the voters when we passed Prop 1A. So I was concerned that the draft business plan did not have a funding plan for completion of that, but what I heard you say was that the final business plan will have a funding plan for completion of the entire phase one. Is that correct?
It is, with one caveat, Assembly Member, which is what we were asked is to identify sources that could flesh out a full funding plan. I don't think it will have necessarily the specificity, but it will talk about a basket of potential funding sources that we believe could help complete phase one. I don't want to make it more majestic than perhaps it'll be at this point, because there's still going to be significant uncertainties. But we will address the issue that was raised on the Senate side and by LAO to come back and talk about what are the broad outlines of how we could complete the funding for the entire phase one.
Okay. Well, I don't think we're looking for majestic, but I think what would suffice is a variety of contingencies. So, for example, this is one way we could make it work, or if this funding source doesn't come through, this is one way we could make it work. In other words, just something that gives us some confidence that we will indeed be able to finish the entire plan, because my fear is that we're just talking about a regional transit project at this point, and that's not going to be something that that the voters are going to be okay with.
Or that we're going to be okay with.
All right.
But we understand, sir, and that's what we will do.
And then just briefly, A second concern that I have is that we have made substantial, perhaps not legal commitments, but essentially moral commitments to the bookending projects that we've talked about in Southern California. And I think it's extremely important that we follow through on those commitments and attach real dollars to those projects. And I think that that would go a long ways towards alleviating some of the objections that people have to shifting that initial operating segment. And so I trust that you're going to work with our regional transit agencies in Southern California to make that happen.
We are committing to you and your colleagues, sir, that that is exactly what we're doing. And let me also note that Secretary Kelly has been very instrumental in those, because some of those sources of money from the state he can help organize as well. But we are very committed morally and we believe legally to accomplish what was in the MOU in Southern California as well as Northern California.
Well, I'm relieved to hear that. And if we can attach real dollars to those commitments, it would be much appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome, and thank you very much for your testimony here this morning. Thank you all for your questions. We will now proceed on, if I can ask you all to vacate your seats, because we do have 5 people stepping up for the public comment, the Issue 4 segment of our hearing here this morning. And so I'd like to call forward David DePinto from Save Angeles Forest for Everyone, Frank Oliveira, Citizens for California High-Speed Rail Accountability, Mike Brady of the Community Coalition, David Schoenbrunn, Train Riders Association of California, and William Grindley.
What is it? What is the order?
As you're situating yourselves, we're running a little bit late in our hearing. We have a second panel that will follow this one. We'll try to move as crisply as possible through both of them. And for those of you who are here to give additional public comment, I don't know how many folks there are here who will be asking to speak at the end of the meeting. I'll stay as long as we need to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to provide their testimony. I don't have the issue fortunately in this hearing that we did in the last one. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for being here. There's an order that's provided in the agenda, but you're welcome to go in any order that you see fit.
We'll be going this direction.
Got it. L shape.
Thank you.
Mr. DePinto, welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Bloom. Good morning, committee members. I'm Dave DePinto. I'm with the SAFE Coalition, president of one of the largest homeowner associations in the city of Los Angeles, in the Northeast San Fernando Valley. I'll start with our answer to the fundamental question of whether the project warrants additional oversight. Yes, it needs oversight for budgets, timelines, public outreach, and environmental integrity. Oversight is needed relative to adherence and in the integrity of the NEPA, CEQA, and the authority's own SAA report process. Remember the adage, a lack of planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine. We believe present oversight lacks the bandwidth and resources to keep tabs on what's now a $21 billion organization. We ask Northern Californians to pay attention. Without greater oversight, here's what happened to us, and here's what you can expect. You'll read about routes and route changes in the mail. We just heard about enormous development from Mr. Richard in station communities. Many of us don't seek that. You'll receive permit to enter letters on Christmas Eve. We're getting them right now in our communities again with no advance notice. You'll receive no response to your comment letters and testimony at public hearings. You'll not be allowed to speak at authority-sponsored outreach meetings. You'll experience filibusters at public meetings by authority spokespersons. You'll be patronized by false optimistic timelines for environmental studies. And there'll be a lack of information and confusion regarding route alternative decisions. The only communication we've had from the authority since the June 2015 board meeting was a notice that all community outreach for the balance of 2015 had been canceled, and it hasn't continued into 2016 either. 3 weeks ago at a San Fernando Valley COG meeting, the authority announced new route changes. Yet even with a board meeting scheduled next week in Anaheim, the SAA report explaining those route changes is not public information. That report will lack the input as a result from the public and elected officials who unanimously oppose what we refer to as the above ground routes. I'll wager $21 billion that the authority will approve or take no action on that SAA report and let staff move forward unchecked. The case study that I will share with you is the obvious conflict of interest created by the authority by engaging the Mineta Transportation Institute to conduct an equine study. This is not an indictment of Mineta. This is a mistake made by the High-Speed Rail Authority that they will not admit and they will not undo. This study is now part of the NEPA, CEQA, and SAA processes and is being used to unfairly justify the route that Frank is going to just give you a quick look at. This is the Big Tonga Wash, which connects the San Gabriel Mountains with the San Fernando Valley and the Los Angeles River. It includes the Tujunga Ponds Mitigation Area, Haynes Canyon Creek, LA's drinking water, hundreds of multi-purpose trails, wildlife, and the endangered Santa Ana suckerfish. It's no place for a viaduct, 5 to 10 years of damaging construction, or 5 more years of environmental study. It's a showstopper. It's a fatal flaw. Assemblyman Bloom, our Big Tonga Wash, as we talked about, is our Santa Monica Bay. Assemblyman Gordon, the Big Tonga Wash, is our Pescadero State Beach, the Palo Alto Baylands Preserve, and Tomcat Ranch. Assemblyman Obernolte, can you imagine this at Big Bear Lake or the Mojave National Preserve? Assemblyman Patterson, this area is on a par with your beautiful Sierra National Forest. The Mineta Equine Study is mere desktop research, no field research. It's already been rejected by the Los Angeles Equine Advisory Committee, several veterinarians with equine expertise, and our own 11-page critique, a copy of which I will submit. This study and several others were supposed to have been developed collaboratively and independently. The board voted unanimously to do that at their June 2015 board meeting. Dan Richard promised ongoing updates, in particular on their website. They failed to do this. Upset as we were, on December 3rd of 2015, we realized we had a bigger problem. We identified at least 4 Mineta Board of Trustee members with conflicts of interest with the High-Speed Rail Authority. These include the current authority CEO, 2 highly paid contractors, and a former authority chairman and board member. Our equine community never had a chance. The Mineta study is a biased, incomplete, and erroneous study being used to justify the route you just looked at within the environmental review process. We don't think this is the way to conduct business, particularly by the state of California. Have you ever seen a greater outcry in the state of California against a project for more oversight? Members, we suggest you focus very carefully, not on whether to increase oversight, but by how much and with what specific metrics and measurable guidelines. The authority should not receive special treatment and social promotion like a favored child. An overhaul may be more appropriate. If environmental oversight is not your immediate and specific purview, committee members, despite the nexus that these protracted studies have with your costs, please enlist the oversight capabilities of the appropriate committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Frank Oliveris, Citizens for California High-Speed Rail Accountability. Since the project's 2012 business plan, 4 years have passed, and the authority has steadfastly proclaimed to the legislature, local governments, and the media, as well as the public, that they were building the initial operating section south, Merced to LA. The authority assured everyone that building the IOS South first was both financially and technically possible and absolutely critical to connect the Central Valley to Los Angeles and bridge the passenger rail gap between northern and southern regions of the state. Based on this premise, the authority justified their actions before you, the legislature, media, public, and dozens of times to secure funding through cap and trade. Just a year ago, the authority orchestrated a celebration in Fresno where they declared that the construction of the high-speed rail system between Merced and LA had begun. Passionate speeches were delivered. Some of you were there and applauded when the IOS South was declared to be transformative and to the state and the public. So what happened? You and I were misled. No matter how much cap and trade money is channeled into this greenhouse gas generating project, it will not be enough for the project to survive. Cap and trade funding is supposed to be used to reduce greenhouse gas by 2020, not create more greenhouse gas and pollution for decades to come, as this project will do. The reality is in 2020, you will be solicited to extend cap-and-trade laws indefinitely so that the gross polluter can be funded for decades to come on assurances by the authority that this will be a green project maybe someday. The draft business plan relies on you executing the legislative action that will deprive worthy projects of needed funding that will actually affect the climate in a positive manner. Without this legislation, the project does not work. Assuming that you, the legislature, do propel the future legislation that provides the authority with more cap-and-trade funding indefinitely, the project still never connects San Francisco to LA, which is phase one, because of its lack of financial viability or funding identified in the draft business plan. There is no financial plan identified to extend the project from that north of Shafter to reach LA. For 8 years, phase one has been the project mission. It is also the primary mission reflected in Proposition 1A and AB 3034. The draft business plan does not provide a realistic path forward. The draft business plan also omits the cost of the project for the entire 800-mile project. The authority is required by law to forecast the cost of Phase 2, the 800-mile project, in its business plan, but never has, and it will not until you demand that they do so. So I ask you, does the authority have to comply with the law? We've heard today, and I've heard in a Senate Transportation Committee and an Assembly Transportation Committee, the chairman of the High-Speed Rail Authority say that they don't have enough money to build phase one, that it will come from somewhere. If he says that they don't know where the money will come from, maybe you should pay attention. There is no source of more money. The authority does not have the financial ability to build anything beyond 100 miles or so. There is not enough money available to put a functional high-speed train on what they are building. There are no ridership studies that we are aware of that have been done on the demand of travel between San Jose and Shafter. The authority has recklessly entered into billion-dollar construction contracts already, despite not even knowing what direction the project was going. The authority does not have a planning process with technical capacity to properly assess the technical issues involved with mountain crossings and other complicated issues. At the end of the day, the construction contracts were signed and the construction started. The authority is now changing the entire direction of the project because of cost and complications. Clearly, the authority in 2012 and 2014 business plans misled us all. Not to worry, the authority has things handled. Remember, the authority was sitting in front of your subcommittee defending doing the iOS South as the right priority a mere 2 months ago, and the mountains were very doable back then. I guess they were misleading you and I on that day. I have 5 documents to submit to you which have more detail. Failing to properly oversee the high-speed rail authority will not make problems go away, lead to a successful high-speed rail system being built. Continuing to pour public dollars into an authority that has misled all of us will not lead to a successful project. Unfortunately, only changing the authority's management team and the board that oversees the project will change its culture of deceit, waste, and mismanagement and lead to a successful project someday. Do something about it. Everybody in the state is waiting for you to act. Do you have the courage to do the right thing today? If you have any questions, I'm willing to communicate with you.
Thank you for your presentation.